Reddit is full of scary stories of all kinds, but what you don't know is that some of them are real and didn't end well. In this video, you will discover the most mind-blowing stories on Reddit. But first, if you're new here, remember to subscribe to the channel. The channel's goal is to get 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can achieve it. So please sign up. Now, let's move on to the first story. I am a mailman. Did I just deliver to a non-existent street? Before I begin, I want to make a few points clear. First, for my job security, and to discourage people from investigating, I will not disclose the exact location of my employment. However, I can tell you that it is near the Delaware Water Gap in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and I work as a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service. Secondly, I am not a writer by any means, but due to the events I have experienced, I feel compelled to write this for others to read and perhaps create their own theories, so I hope you will excuse any grammatical errors. Thirdly, this may sound funny, but I think it's important to mention that I'm not a user of drugs, so I can confirm that what happened wasn't because I was high. But at one point I thought it was, but I was working at the time, so it's unlikely. Finally, this happened around mid-November when it started to get dark around 3 p.m. So let's start. As I mentioned, I'm a postal worker, or postman as he's more commonly called. It's not an easy job. You might think that walking to homes and dropping off mail and packages along a set route would be simple. But there's more to it than just following your usual route. Whenever another mail carrier has the day off or is off sick, his route is divided into sections, so multiple mail carriers are tasked with completing it. This is what we call pivots, because you pivot from your normal mail route to someone else's route. To find out if you have a pivot, you check a piece of paper on your desk as soon as you clock in. This was standard procedure, so when I saw the piece of paper on my desk, I knew I had extra work for the day. I sighed because that meant working more than 8 hours. The piece said, Route 76. In our office, we have routes designated by numbers, and my route number is 44. So today, I was working on all of Route 44 plus a section of Route 76. But there was something strange about this pivot. Our office only has about 50 routes. I've never heard of Route 76. I took her to my manager and asked about her. He said it was a route from the neighboring city, which was understaffed and needed help. He returned the paper and told me to read the additional information at the bottom. The paper said I should pick up the letters for this pivot from a relay box near where I would deliver. I wrote down the directions and address of the relay box, loaded my truck with my own mail, and headed out to make my route. It was a cold day, typical of late autumn, but otherwise it was a standard day. Once I finished my route, I put the pivot address into my phone and drove to the Route 76 pivot location. It was 3 p.m. and it was already getting dark. I arrived at the location of the relay box. This town was smaller and more rural than mine. I opened the relay box and found a tray of letters. I put them in my truck and headed down the street, Marlboro Road. I parked, picked up the letters, and started delivering them. It was a simple street that ended in a dead end. As I walked, I crossed what appeared to be an abandoned street, a dirt road that led into the forest. But it wasn't part of my pivot, so I ignored it and continued. After finishing my pivot, I received a message on my postal scanner. Pivot Route 76 returned to relay box. Additional correspondence within. I was irritated, but I knew this meant more overtime pay, so I returned to the relay box. It was already dark, and the relay box was lit by a single street light. Inside was a handful of letters held together by a rubber band. I was relieved. It would be about 20 minutes of extra work. The address was Notch Road. I typed Notch Road into my GPS and saw that it was on Marlboro Road, leading to the dirt road I had crossed earlier. There's no way that's the road I'm giving it to. It was a dirt road that led to the forest, I thought. So at that moment in my head, I decided that I should go there to take a photo of the dirt road and send it to management to show that there was nothing there. But when I arrived, the dirt road was now a newly paved street, and a lone sign now stood on the corner saying Notch Road. Confused, I wondered if I had imagined the dirt road, and I pondered the strange situation, but I had a job to do, so I shrugged it off, started my truck, and turned onto Notch Road. The road felt strangely smooth, as if I were hovering over it. The street was lit by what appeared to be streetlights, but the light sources came from the tops of the pine trees, as if the trees themselves were streetlights disguised to look like trees. After several minutes, I reached the end of the road. There were 4 houses, 2 on each side, all looking like they were from the 1950s. The lawns were manicured, and every driveway had a 1950s Chevrolet parked. It felt like I had driven into the past. I parked with my back to the houses, so when I'm done I can drive away. But when I turned off the engine and opened the door, that's when I realized the eerie silence. No animal sounds, no wind, no rustling foliage. There was also a faint smell of burning wood, but none of the houses had chimney smoke. I approached the first house, put the letters in the old mailbox, and felt like I was being watched. I turned around, but the windows of the house were pitch black. I shrugged and continued to the second house, starting to feel a little uncomfortable, but I continued and delivered it to the second house without any problems. At the third house, just as I dropped off the mail, I heard a faint voice. I couldn't understand what was said. All I know is that it sounded hoarse with a cough in the middle. I assumed it was the owner of the house, possibly smoking and coughing, so I dismissed it as anything else. I went to the last house, wanting to finish and leave. When I dropped the cards, that's when the strangest thing happened. The door to that house slowly opened, revealing total darkness inside and a warm breeze hitting my face as if I had just opened an oven. Frozen with terror, I felt something watching me behind me, and I had the feeling that whatever it was getting closer. Panic set in, and I ran to my truck without looking back. I heard doors to other houses opening and what sounded like voices shouting at me as I ran. I jumped in my truck, started it, and drove away. In the mirrors, I saw dark figures standing near the houses watching me leave. They looked like dark silhouettes with dim white lights where their eyes should have been. I quickly exited Notch Road, making a sharp left, and accelerated. Back at the post office, I noticed that my truck was covered in ash. I reported my experience to my manager, who laughed and said there never was a Notch Road, just a dirt road leading into the city-owned forest. Since pivoting to Route 76, I have been restless at work. My mind is flooded with theories like, did I indirectly enter the game of left and right? Or maybe the burning smell was from some psychedelic-inducing plant, and maybe I got caught on a trip. But it all seems too real to me. A few weeks later, I found a postcard in my mailbox. The image was solid black, and the message read, "We are glad you visited us. Come back soon. Notch Road." So that was my experience. What do you think? Like I said in the story, I still feel uncomfortable about the situation, but since I got that postcard, I have to wonder, is this an elaborate prank or something else? Tomorrow I'm going to visit the mailman who frequents Route 76 and ask him about Notch Road. If I hear something interesting, I'll share it. There's a series of strange games circulating online. I'm losing my sanity. Day after day, it's slipping out of my grasp and I don't know how to stop. And it's all because of that stupid game. That runner game shit. Here's the thing, some words may be mixed up, but I'm writing it as I remember it. Last week, my girlfriend and I had a little problem. Well, I found out she was cheating on me with her boyfriend, and I was the midwife without knowing, and get this, the guy thought I was her gay best friend. So I was up against a brick wall, emotionally, and I was a little lost. My mind was just wavering. I'm not a person who uses drugs. I just deal with situations head on and hope for the best. But this thing ruined me. I was losing sleep, scrolling the internet looking for anything to distract me. That's when I stumbled upon a thread of supernatural games you can play. I read, and a lot of them were some shit invented or shit which required a lot of effort. I needed something with minimal effort, something I could do at home, Corridor game, door of opportunities. Steps: find an apartment building with hallways. 2, wait 2:02 to play. 3, knock 3 times and say that I open the doors of opportunities for our world. 4, don't let the door close. I shrugged, rolling my eyes in disbelief at how silly that sound was. But I lived in an apartment building, so what was the harm in trying? The clock showed 22:45. I just had to wait a little. Now here's the thing, I live in door number 24. Each side has 10 doors. The hallway walls are peach with red doors. and the numbers are in gold metal. At the other end, there is an elevator. At the other end, there are stairs that go down or up, depending on how you want to go. At 2:02, I was outside standing at my door. I took a deep breath and then 3 beats. I opened the doors of opportunity to our world. Suddenly, my room felt cold. Just a small breeze enough to make me shiver for a moment. Then I opened the door. Oh Lord, my mind exploded. The hallway, which is usually well lit, had lamps hanging dimly, swaying from side to side with very little light to illuminate the entire hallway. I took careful steps looking around. The walls were still the same. Just the paint was fading, claw marks on the doors, and some door numbers were hanging from their places. The atmosphere had changed. The air smelled musty. I walked towards the elevator, trying to enjoy the view. I reached door 28 and grabbed the handle, then opened it. It led me to a void. I can't even say void because it led me to nothing, just a void and an opening in space. I reached out my hand, letting the darkness engulf it. My entire arm felt non-existent. I lost all sensation to the darkness. I tried to move my fingers, but I couldn't, so I pulled my arm out. I hung up and went to another one. The floorboards were creaking. Silent whispers of walls that disappeared whenever I looked in the direction. The room I opened next had a man lying on a bed, a line of women coming from, I don't even know, maybe from outside, because there were like 23 women new. I noticed that they all had the same face, but different body types and colors. The man was sobbing while these women mounted. Please, please, no more, he begged. And they took turns having sex with him. He saw me. He was grunting in agony. Mate me. Please, he murmured. And another woman came on top, while another was waiting. The line kept getting longer and longer. These women seemed to appear out of nowhere. I quickly closed the door. I had never seen that man before, so I opened another. There was an almost invisible man under stacks and stacks of $100 bills. There was so much money that he was practically buried under it. Only his nose was visible. Whimpers escaped his mouth, muttering something incoherent. I left that door and opened another one. A woman was on top of a counter, screaming at the top of her lungs. Men crawling under her, barking like dogs, confessing their love. Some were carving her skin with knives, writing her name, and she saw me. Please, please take me with you, please. The men turned to look at me and growled. I ran out of that room, opened the last door. This one made my brain hurt. There was a man not in the middle of the room, semen everywhere, on the walls, on the floor, on the windows. He was carrying a photo. I swear it was a photo of Jesus. The room stank. I had to cover my nose. The floor was wet and the ceiling was dripping. This man was shaking his penis while enjoying across the room. It almost hit me. He turned around and saw me. There were tears in his eyes. Please make it stop. He continued masturbating and just shooting your sperm for all sides. I had to run away at that moment. During my run, I tripped and ran into another door. I found a woman who was surrounded by food. A lot of food. Some rotten, some still fresh. She was eating. She kept eating and eating. She couldn't stop. Tears streamed down her face as she filled her mouth. His stomach grew and grew and grew until it exploded, and his guts were flying everywhere. Just like that, she returned to normal. It was an endless circle. Suddenly, I had seen enough, so I returned to my room. I opened the door and went to bed. When morning came, I had a migraine, but I had to go to school. Now, every day before I leave the house, I play a song. The distance from my room to the elevator or stairs is probably 35 seconds. I walked and walked, and the music played and ended before I even got to the elevator. I figured I might have rushed forward by mistake. Over the next few days, I noticed that the hallway was getting longer and longer. Every time I walked, it felt like I was walking for miles. I could see the elevator a few feet away, but it looked like I hadn't even gotten there yet. So I started running just to see if I wasn't overdoing it. And to no one's surprise, I wasn't getting to the end. I didn't reach the end. I've been stuck in the hallway for what feels like days, but my clock is still at 2:02. Need help. I really need help. The paint on the walls is fading, melting. The doors started to rattle and I'm hearing things, screams and moans. Need help. I encountered true fear working overnight stock in a grocery store next to a crack house. I'm having a hard time writing this on my ratty, uncomfortable couch. I'm having trouble adjusting the pillows so my back doesn't scream at me. I slipped a vertebra in my back years ago, and it gets a lot worse when I sit for a long time. I worked grocery, dairy, and frozen food at a smaller grocery store next to a crack house. It was a reasonable job that started at 3 a.m. every day. Two-person teams broke down pallets of food and threw them onto shelves. Occasionally, things happened. And one thing worth noting is that the lights are on a circuit breaker that resets every 30 minutes until 5 a.m. I don't know why it was designed this way, but I assume it's to save money. From midnight to 5 a.m., you have to go into this small, dark closet and press buttons individually to turn on the lights in different sections of the store. You may hear the circuit breaker make a loud grunting noise after pressing the buttons for approximately 3-4 seconds. I started noticing breathing on the back of my neck in this room about a year after I started working. I always had a strange feeling walking into work and an especially strange confusion walking into this room to turn on the lights, and I felt a little dizzy and disoriented as I went from the fluorescent lights to total darkness. Standing in the room and holding down the various buttons kind of turned into a game with the rest of my coworkers. We played rock, paper, scissors to see who would go to the back and turn on the lights. In the first year, I felt confused while in the room. You kind of forgot why you were there as you held the buttons, and then the light took you away. Fair warning, I drank a lot when I had this job. I barely slept because I drank until 10-11 p.m. and woke up a few hours later to go to work. There's a good chance this was all in my head because of sleep deprivation, but whatever. I stayed at that job for years, throwing groceries on shelves, stopping to tighten the lights, feeling a strange warm breath on my neck and shutting down, looking at those buttons only to be rescued by the light. I swear to God, every now and then I would see it out of the corner of my eye, but those lights would come on and break my paralysis. It became a bit of a watch. Looking back, it seems like we were on autopilot, stocking the shelves with the same shit every day and turning on the same lights every day. It was the same routine until it wasn't anymore. One night it was me and my night assistant Jane. We were the only two in the store. Jane is kind of similar to me in that we dropped out of college to pursue more academic experiences, like how many boxes of canned beans we could fit on a shelf because God forbid any of them went into the back storage. Honestly, Jane and I were really good at it. We were both in our early 20s and cared about finishing the work of stocking the shelves. I used to move fast, and so did she. We have a system built into the routine that the lights gave us. We took different corridors and tried to race against each other, which always made the dawn pass quickly. Alongside the hallways were glass refrigerator doors. Even in a hallway above, you could use reflection to see the next one. We took turns turning on the lights. I mentioned that this store is close to a very popular crack house. On this particular night, one of the regular customers came around 3:30 in the morning knocking on the automatic glass doors. The guy was red in the face and had irregular, actively bleeding marks on his cheeks. You could see that his nails were painted red with blood. Small scabs were observed under the nails. He was sunburned and yelling at us. This has happened before, but usually they just ask for water and ignore us when we tell them where the public drinking fountains are. The guy kept hitting the glass with his fists. It was difficult to understand what he was shouting, and I told him to go away. Most of the words kind of blended together and sounded like he was speaking English, but I couldn't understand a word. Of course, the lights went out at 3:30 in the morning. The reverse lights are extremely low, and you really have to squint to see any real detail. The outside lights work great. This guy looked like he was on a stage, silhouetted by the street lights outside. I told myself I wasn't worried because I was protected by 1/8-inch glass, locked by a small metal clasp, except I had the key too. Honestly, I was terrified. It would be pretty easy to get in if he wanted to, and I didn't really know what he wanted. Jane was already on her way to the back room to turn the breaker back on, while I stood in front of the store trying to figure out when to call the police on a crackhead screaming in the middle of the night. As soon as Jane disappeared into the back room, The man straightened up, and I actually saw fear in his eyes. He was still screaming shit that didn't make sense, but he pointed one of his fingers just past my left shoulder. Part of me wanted to turn around and see what he was pointing at, but I started to feel that breathing again. That hot, ragged breath on my neck sent shivers down my spine. I'm sure my voice cracked as I yelled at him, "Go the fuck away!" Just then, the fluorescent lights came back on, and my head swam back to the surface. This guy spoke so clearly it scared the hell out of me. "It's not her." He turned and walked back across the street into the neighborhood and continued looking over his shoulder. We finally got back to stocking the shelves a few minutes later and had a light conversation about what was that guy's deal. Jane was in one hallway and I was in the other. We returned to the routine. I could kind of see her in the reflection of the freezer section doors. This continued for a while, and I felt my heart slow down as I focused on work. I wasn't sure what time it was, but suddenly I felt my back give way as I reached for a juice box. My right hand went to my lower back and I could barely breathe. I saw my coworker in the reflection of the freezer doors, staring at me from across the hall. The lights went out and I couldn't make out his shape either, just a shadow. I yelled that I had messed up my back, and the lights came on. I couldn't see her, and I was so confused and slowly walked out of the hallway to look. She was gone, and I looked towards the back of the store where she came out through the double doors that led to the stock room with the circuit breaker room. When she saw me in pain, she ran over and asked what happened, but I couldn't answer because of the pain and what I saw. Over the years, my imagination has gone wild, and I imagine her in the reflection of the freezer door as the girl in the ring. She just stares at me and disappears when the lights come on. I think about what the guy with the cavernous face said, and maybe if that fueled my paranoia. I know it's not the craziest, scariest story, but when I think about it, I can still feel the breath on the back of my neck, which makes my back freeze and reactivate an injury I suffered on the same job. Looking back, I discount my own conscience based on the amount of sleep I was getting and the booze I was consuming, but something always bothered me. Two things are absolutely true. Something was staring at me in the reflection of the freezer doors, and something turned on the lights. The hidden presence. I don't know exactly how to start this, but I'm a new single father with 2 children, John and Jane. They are twins, placeholder names, not their real names. I'm working 40+ hours a week to support my children, but no matter what, I always put them first. When their mother passed away, I promised her that I would take care of them and never put them in danger. After she passed away, my children, who were 7 at the time, didn't take it well, which is perfectly normal. My family, who lives a few states away, took time out of their schedules to come and help me and my children during this time. My parents even stayed with us for almost a year. Unfortunately, my son got the worst of it. No matter how much I tried to lift his spirits and make him smile, he wouldn't budge. Doctors told me he has traumatic mutism. I did everything the doctors advised. I took him to cognitive behavioral therapy, play therapy, family therapy, speech therapy. Every therapy you can imagine. The only thing that helped me understand him and his emotions better was his diary. We didn't start the journal method until he was almost 9, but he wrote in it quite often, which gave me a rare glimpse into his emotions. Recently, however, I have seen some entries that are deeply concerning. I showed them to his therapist, but he told me that he created an imaginary friend as a coping mechanism for comfort and security. However, I can't shake this feeling of dread these entries give me. Your words, your descriptions, something isn't right. I feel a cold hand squeezing my heart every time I read them. I wanted to share some excerpts with you. I rewrote them so you can actually read what they say. I also didn't change anything he wrote. I hope someone can help me understand. Am I just being paranoid, or is there something more sinister at play here? Sorry for the long backstory. I just wanted to clarify some information so everyone can have a better idea of my situation. All comments are welcome. Just don't be scared. Thank you, and I hope everyone can help me. August 12th, 2013. Dear Diary, I had a good day. Nancy took us to the park and we had ice cream. I got a SpongeBob popsicle. I love the gum that comes with it. It's like a double treat. The park had a clown. I tried to show it to Jane, but she said, "What am I looking at?" I think girls really go to Jupiter. Okay, bye, diary. August 15th, 2013. Dear diary, their diary, I had a fun day. Nancy took us to the park and I went on my favorite slide. It's the red slide. I like it because I can ride it all the time since children never go there. Today was fun because on the slide I found a SpongeBob popsicle. I showed it to Jane, but she just yelled at Nancy, asking why I got ice cream and not her. Nancy was confused because I had already eaten my SpongeBob, so she bought us more ice cream. Double ice cream is always fun. Dad came home early and we watched Adventure Time. Okay, bye diary. August 19th of 2013. Dear diary, their diary. I saw Mr. Clown last night. I was playing with my toys by the window and I saw him. He was in our forest with a big black bag. Maybe he has his clown stuff like shoes and chickens. He looked at me and I knew he saw me. We looked at each other for a long time. He honked his red nose at me and I honked back. Mr. Clown left. Mr. Clown is funny. Bye, diary. August 20th, 2013. Dear diary, their diary, Nancy took me to Miss Claire. She is a doctor who plays with me and makes me write to you. Miss Claire is cool. Nancy then took us to Ryan's house today. I don't like Ryan, he only plays with Jane. I like walking through the forest and looking for swords. Nancy yelled at me because I was playing there. Nancy never yells at Jane, only at me. Okay, bye diary. August 22nd, 2013. Dear diary, their diary, Jane hit me. We were in the park and I saw Mr. Clown again. He honked his red nose and I honked mine. I laughed and he laughed. I wanted Jane to laugh, so I went to get her. She didn't want to see it and told me to leave her alone, but she likes to laugh. So I tried to pull her over to show her Mr. Clown, but she kept saying no and hit me. I cried and Nancy hugged me and said Jane just didn't want to play. I wanted Jane to know that she was going to Jupiter and I was going to Mars. Okay, bye diary. August 23rd, 2013. Dear diary, Dad arrived early and we went to the park. I took him to the red slide and we found a SpongeBob popsicle on the slide. I was so happy, but he said we don't eat things that aren't ours. But I'm the only one who goes on the red slide, so it's mine. But it's all right. He gave us new popsicles. I ordered SpongeBob, but they said they ran out. You are the ice cream man. Do you sell ice cream? I wasn't very happy, but at least the Ninja Turtle one is good too. Bye, diary. August 24th, 2013. Dear diary, today Dad took us to Ryan's house. I don't like Ryan's house, but I saw Mr. Clown in the woods. I gave him a sword stick and we played. He stopped playing and looked at me. He stared for a long time without doing anything. I thought he was done, so I left, but then he got a SpongeBob popsicle. I tried to catch him, but he backed away and he shook his finger and pointed at the house. He started running like a dog into the forest. Mr. Clown is funny. I went back to the house and found SpongeBob's popsicle on the slide. Mr. Clown is cool. I like Mr. Clown. The shortcut. My family and I recently moved from California to Alabama. The transition was exciting, to say the least. Find new jobs, place your children at school, learn all the roads of a new city. Driving to some of the more basic locations feels like an adventure being in this new area. Being born and raised in California and separating after 35 years, Alabama feels like a totally different country. Finding a job wasn't very difficult. I focused on the field I worked in California and accepted a quality control position at a roofing manufacturer. It took about 40 minutes to get to work depending on traffic. This may not seem like a very long commute to some, but since I only lived 10 minutes from my previous job, I wasn't too keen on the idea of spending an hour and 20 minutes or more in the car every day. When I found the shortcut through a local wooded area, I was ecstatic. It ended up saving me about 10 minutes on my commute to and from work. I love technology and what you can discover just by looking at a satellite image on Google Maps. I had been in training at my new job for about 3 months, working the morning shift from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., knowing all along that I would eventually be moved to second shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. I wasn't entirely thrilled with the idea of working those hours and coming home so late, but I already got along well with that team working those hours. I hope this helps smooth the transition. Driving to and from work every day, I always took the same boring route. The shortcut marked the halfway point between work and my home. If I got irritated about my commute to work, I reminded myself that the commute could have taken a lot longer if I hadn't found this route. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who drives this dirt road. I haven't seen another vehicle on it yet. It's the first day I'll be working my new shift. Monday afternoon, it was pretty gloomy all morning, raining every now and then, and I was exhausted. I didn't sleep much. It's not easy to change your sleep schedule. I stopped at the gas station like I do every Monday, filled up the truck and got an energy drink. I figured it would be a long night and I would need it. This shift is going to take some getting used to. A little liquid crack should help me. Tonight was like working the first shift. It was pretty normal and uneventful, but it was nice to be able to listen to some music since we didn't have any management pressuring us. We called it a night, said hello to the night shift, and headed home. I like driving at this time of night. Most of the shops in town closed at 11, so there were hardly any cars on the road. I must have had a period of highway hypnosis on my way home. It felt like I had just started driving and was already at the point of making my turn into the forest, into the shortcut. I never gave the shortcut much thought in the last 3 months, other than the fact that it saved me time. It had just become part of my daily routine. This was the first time I took the narrow dirt path home at night. Seeing him at night, there was something different about him, almost like real life. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I hadn't thought about how scary it could look at night. All the overgrown trees and bushes blocked most of the already dim moonlight. It was cloudy all day. The path was extremely narrow, with only room for one vehicle. The bushes on each side frequently bumped into the driver's and passenger's side mirrors. I started to feel uncomfortable, claustrophobic. After a few minutes, I thought to myself, how long have I been on this road? Normally, it only takes a few minutes to cross this forest. Why does it feel like it took longer? It takes approximately 10-15 minutes to get to the shortcut depending on traffic, and there was no traffic at all tonight. I looked at the clock on the radio, 11:18. That can't be right, I thought. As all the thoughts were falling through my mind, I came to a large clearing and stopped. I've never seen that. I turned onto the right road. I've been getting it for 3 months. My thoughts were broken by a sound. I cry. One baby. Crying. I froze, opened my windows slightly and listened. There it was again, this time louder. How could there be a child here in the middle of this forest? I was worried and terrified at the same time. It appeared to be about 20 yards from the passenger side of the truck, just inside the tree line, and it was getting louder or it was getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight from the driver's door, shining it into the passenger window, doing nothing but temporarily blinding myself with the reflection. I hung up immediately, cursing my own stupidity, and I rolled the window down a little further, slid across the seat to the passenger side, and shined the flashlight out the window. I swiveled the light back and forth, scanning the tree line for the source of the sounds. Anything. I turned off the light and waited. After a few moments, I slowly slid back into the driver's side, trying to make as little noise as possible, straining my ears, listening with bated breath. I sat still. I was about to put my truck in drive when I heard a loud thud and saw movement out of the corner of my eye, and more crying coming from the same direction. I put the truck in motion and headed out onto the dirt road. I changed my mind. I didn't want to stay there any longer and find out what was making that noise. Not a minute later, the yellow light on the dashboard caught my attention. My gas light. There's no way, I just got gas before work. It must be a fault with a fuse, a sensor, or something like that. My fuel gauge is empty. My gas light is on. How is this possible? I continued, frantic to see the end of that dirt path. Suddenly the engine sputtered a few times, and then he died. The meter was correct. I stopped in a clearing a little smaller than the last one and smelled a strong aroma of gasoline. How is this possible? Is there a hole in my tank? Yeah. I don't think I hit anything. I've been through this almost 100 times. The next thought shook me to my core. When I caught a glimpse of whatever it was it coming from under the truck? I started to panic, my eyes darting back and forth. I focused ahead and turned on my high beams. There was no end in sight. I took out my cell phone. I had to talk to my wife. There was no way I could walk, not with whoever was out there. It's not playing. I have a signal, but it's not ringing. I tried a dozen more times. I restarted my phone in hopes that this might fix it. Still nothing. Then I heard the crying again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked around frantically. There it was, the source of the screams. On all fours, I could barely make out in the eerie light, barely escaping the canopy above. It was a huge, clumsy beast. I see her, and she sees me. The noise she made next was almost indescribable. It started as a scream and then turned into a deep, guttural roar. I ran to the weapon under my seat, trying not to take my eyes off the beast. She shot to the tree line, out of sight. I held my weapon firmly in my right hand, flashlight in my left, and I waited. I certainly couldn't sit here all night. What the hell was that thing? I tried to listen for movement or see if I could hear that scream again. Nothing but my rapid heartbeat. And I had to get out of here. But how? It seemed impossible to think, my thoughts clouded and troubled by what I had seen, and I had no idea where that creature was, but it knows where I am. I need to attract her. I turned off my overhead light, and as quickly as possible, I unlocked my door, opened it, knocked it, and locked it. As soon as the door slammed, I heard something scrambling through the trees and bushes on the left side of my truck. A high-pitched, excited wail sounded, and something knocked on the driver's door. I could see the top of his head through the driver's window. Then he got up. He had sunken eyes, red and lifeless, and a foaming drool dripping from what appeared to be fangs, like a wild animal. Your skin, red blood deep and fleshy, as if there were no epidermal layers, just exposed muscles and tendons. I screamed and frantically slid down the seat to the passenger side as he backed up and slammed his face into the glass, shattering it, sending shards of glass into my face, cutting just below my right eye. You disappear, a panicked shot, and he let out a deafening scream. I knew where I shot, but I think I heard him. Now was my chance. It was now or never. I wasn't going to let this thing take me to these godforsaken forests. I felt for the lock on the passenger door and opened it. You disappear. I've never run so fast before in my life, or been faster scared. I walked back the way I had come, hoping to get back to the road I had turned off because the direction forward seemed endless. There was something strange about that path. It couldn't be my usual route. I had to get back on the road and get away from whatever nightmare had disturbed me. I could feel the blood hot running down my cheek. I awkwardly tried to wipe it off with my blouse, weapon in one hand, flashlight in the other. A thunderous, ear-piercing roar sounded behind me, and the sound of its claws tearing up the dirt path as it tried to gain traction and chase down its prey. I was his prey, and I could hear the excitement as he whimpered uncontrollably like a rabid dog. I struggled to rip off my shirt and threw it into the air, hoping it would distract him. I didn't dare stop running, not even for a moment. I looked back and saw the beast skid to a stop just as my shirt landed in front of it, grabbing it in its jaws and tearing it with its claws effortlessly to shreds. This gave me a little more time. I turned off the flashlight in the hope that the beast would lose sight of me and continued running. I couldn't hear him chasing, but I kept running. I had been running for what seemed like forever when I finally could see the paved road I had come from. Just as I started to feel a little relief, there it was. The creature, standing on hind legs. It must have been at least 2 meters tall and stood halfway between me and the road, and arms outstretched, ready to attack. All I could think about was getting back to my wife and kids, and my body went into flight or fight. I kept running straight towards him. As he crouched down, preparing to attack, I aimed my weapon and I started unloading cartridge after cartridge into it, until the entire magazine was empty. I could hear crushing thuds as the bullets hit their target. The beast screamed in pain and fled into the trees. I kept running towards the road, towards the hope of seeing my family again. My shoes hit the hard pavement. I didn't stop. I ran into the middle of the road. Luckily, the car that was passing by saw me. Otherwise, I probably would have been run over. They honked and stopped next to me. "John!" the driver shouted. "What the hell are you doing here?" It was our neighbor, Daryl. I told him I needed a ride and ran to the passenger side. I was about to explain what had happened, but before I could say a word, he put his index finger to his lips and pointed to the back seat. I turned to see his daughter, passed out in her car seat. He calmly explained that she was teething and that they were having trouble getting her to sleep, so he was driving around to see if that would help. I nodded and thanked him calmly and said I would explain what happened later and that I just wanted to go home. He smiled and nodded back. I looked at the dirt road. No sign of the beast. Studying the area, I knew this was the path I always took. When he pulled into my driveway, I thanked him again and went inside. I expected to see my wife awake and waiting for me on the porch, wondering where I had been. She must have fallen asleep. I entered the house. Everything was quiet. I went to the room. To my surprise, the light was on, but my wife was not in bed. I looked around the room and started calling her. Something on my pillow caught my attention. It was a note. "John, I was worried you weren't home yet. I tried your phone several times, but it didn't ring. I went to find you. I don't like the idea of driving through the woods at night, but I'll check the shortcut." The entity. Things in this world are not always what they seem, and there seems to be much beyond our understanding and what we are often taught growing up. It all started in the spring of 2018 when my fiancée and I decided to move back to her family's farm. Our first house was small, but the price was right, and it had what we needed with 5 acres and a barn. But after 5 years, the plumbing was having problems, and we found severe termite damage that was more trouble than it was worth. Financially, we couldn't build what we wanted yet, and although we both swore we would never live in a double apartment, that's what we decided was the best plan of action under the circumstances, until we could build our dream barn-dominium on the farm. So our house was delivered and assembled in March. We have 50 acres that border the Ouachita National Forest. To an outsider, these mountains may not look like much, but it is one of the oldest mountain ranges in North America, and erosion beyond our understanding has reduced what easily rivaled the Rocky Mountains to what you see today. This was a dream for an outdoorsman like me. Not only did we have our own 50 acres to hunt, but thousands upon thousands of acres of deciduous mountains to roam freely. But the farm had its oddities, and strange things sometimes happened. The first year we dated, we hunted there a few times, and I discovered very quickly that the land behind the barn was uncomfortable. It just gives you goosebumps and the feeling of being watched. This area has a rich history with a main wagon trail and Indian trail very close by. Then there is the story of the haunted inn that sits on the property adjacent to ours, with the inn having burned down years ago. There have been many poker game shootings and stagecoach robberies, some even reported to have been by the James Gang, and the possibility of gold buried nearby them, or the Knights of the Golden Circle. Perhaps this story contributes to these feelings in some way. The property was basically laid out like a rectangle with 2 large barns on the east side, where the driveway runs up from south to north and runs back west like a big L. The first was our house. The next house was the house. My fiancé, grandmother, and inside were my future in-laws. I went to my in-laws to fix some screws on the porch, and that's where it all started, although I didn't know until the next day. But more on that later. It was dark when we decided to go feed our goats that were in the barn as we left. My fiancé said something big and black ran across the yard. I was like, "Well, how big?" Our door is only 30 yards from the tree line that runs straight up the mountain, and we do have bears from time to time, but she said it was more like a big dog. We got in the Jeep, and instead of going to the barn, I turned west toward the in-laws to use the headlights, and sure enough, there was a yellow glow in the eyes and the outline of a large black dog that was perhaps 60 yards from me. I go out with a cheap flashlight and call the dog, but I get a bad reaction. Just 2 big yellow eyes looking back, perfectly still. So I approached him slowly, talking to him, trying to call him to me, and he just trots back into my yard. So I went down the road back to the yard and tried to get closer to him again and get within about 25 yards of him this time, but something wasn't right. Everything seemed strange. I wasn't scared or felt threatened, really, but it didn't feel right. Then it hit me. Like a ton of bricks, it was as if this thing absorbed light like a dark void from another realm. No matter how hard I tried to focus my eyes or adjust the light, I couldn't make out anything with this thing in front of me, except that it appeared to be a dog absorbing light. Cool, this is believable. He eventually got tired of me, wandered across our field to the road, and I dismissed him like a neighbor's dog and went on with my night. The next day, my fiance's grandmother asked me about our big black dog. I replied with a confused look and that we don't have a black dog. She told me when I came back from picking up the screws the day before that he came down from the woods and followed me back to our house. I told her it must be the dog we saw last night. I had told my fiance about how he seemed to absorb light and something just didn't feel right about it all. And it was also huge. My shepherd weighs 70 pounds and our Pyrenees Anatolian mix weighs 85 pounds, and he was much bigger than either of them. 2 days passed without seeing the dog, and he was out of my mind and was discarded as a neighbor's dog down the street or one that was abandoned. At 2 a.m., I'm woken up by my shepherd and the Pyrenees in the house going crazy, barking and growling, trying to get out of their kennels. I get up, walk to the outer door as quietly as I can while the digging goes crazy, and I turn on the light and the beast was on my steps and seemed to be sniffing around the door. As soon as I turned on the lights in one quick motion, this thing did a 180-degree turn, jumped off the steps and disappeared into the darkness again. But this time, I saw his tail, a long bushy tail, like my shepherd's, but bigger and with pointy ears. The black wolf. I know what you're thinking. It's not scary, but seeing it, the way it seemed to absorb light, it seemed pure evil, pure hate. There was something very abnormal about this. My brother-in-law called me a few days later and asked if I had seen a huge black dog or if I'd had any problems. He lives down the street and on the other side of the woods, so I told him about him following me in the encounters. He told me that his pit bull that he keeps back there was going wild the night before, and he came back there with a nice bright light, and 30 yards away in the honeysuckle, there was a pair of yellow eyes looking back. He closed his eyes and he said you couldn't see anything, like he was trying to hide. This went on a few times before he finally saw it and described it the same way I did. Yellow eyes in the shape of a large wolf, but his body, that endless black pit. Somehow he absorbed all the light, and you couldn't make out any details other than his yellow eyes and outline. The day after our wedding in early May, my brother-in-law called me to say he came back the night of our wedding. They arrived home after dark and were sitting on the porch when they heard screams and screams coming from the forest. He picked up a 12-gauge bomb and its light lifted his feet to investigate. And there was the black wolf again at the edge of the thicket, just the yellow eyes staring at him. Deciding he had enough, he aimed and fired, but he didn't expect what happened. A pair of blue eyes suddenly appeared and fell to the ground, and the yellow eyes seemingly disappeared. He approached cautiously to see a small spotted deer lying where the wolf was, drooling all over its back and looking dazed. He went to pet him, but he got up, ran straight to a tree, fell, got up, and jumped deep into the forest. He looked for the wolf, but he saw nothing else, and there was no blood. He attributed this to the fact that he caught the deer and interrupted their dinner and apparently made a mistake. We spent all our money moving, putting in septic land, etc. So our honeymoon was a weekend at home before we went back to work. I told my wife I wanted to look into his claim. We arrive at his house and he tells his story as we head to the place. Look at blood, hair, anything, and I can't find anything. So I start circling the forest and come across a large doe that was, without a doubt, the little deer's mother. I find no signs of injury on her and can only assume she was run over by a car, and that's where she arrived. Sad for the poor deer, knowing he wouldn't survive and would probably end up being the wolf or coyote's dinner. Days passed without the wolf returning, turned into weeks, turned into months. Then the dream happened. We were at a horse show and my mother-in-law was trying to get my wife to buy this horse. I told her no way, we are not buying another horse at all. It was a solid black gelding with a white patch on its face. The next thing I know, I'm in my kitchen looking out the window at the round pen, and that horse is there staring at me. My in-laws bought him anyway. I went to ask my wife on it, but I couldn't find her, and when I looked back, it changed to a very dark, very worn-out Indian lady with long, tangled black hair, dreadlocks, long yellow nails, and wearing a very tattered, long, dirty black dress. With it over her head, the material almost looked like burlap or frayed fringe, and when she saw me looking at her, she smiled. Even though it was a dream, I can still remember the smile, the most disgusting yellow teeth ever. I spent the rest of my dream asking people about the witch who lives in the woods near the barn. Things calmed down quite a bit after that for a while. Every now and then I would see a tree with claw marks about 6 feet tall that I guessed was a bear. One night, while skinning a large 10-point deer, something between us in the barn and our house let out a loud roar/growl. Whenever you skin deer in the barn at night, something walks back and forth in the thicket. Sometimes he comes right at you, but turns on the light and there's nothing to see and he stops moving. As soon as you ignore it, it starts moving again. I always leave the carcass, and the next day, they are gone. My wife was alone in the barn, taking care of a goat that had just had babies and settling them in while I got something she needed from home. These were originally hay barns, so the top half of each end is open so you can hear the outside very well when something growls at her from outside the barn, and she tells me to hurry up and bring one. Rifle. But other than that, everything was very calm. Until it wasn't anymore. I don't know what changed. It's been a few years since the wolf appeared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was back. I had off-the-chart nightmares, waking up randomly scared, my pastor waking us up at 2 a.m., sometimes nights in a row, barking, growling, and wanting to get out. I let her out the first time, and she shot up the mountain. I grabbed a shotgun that was near the door with no light and ran after it. I finally got her to call me back, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt like he was trying to lure her up the mountain. Maybe because he knew I would follow him? Sometimes we would wake up because it sounded like something was banging on the house, but we could never find anything. Happened again. My shepherdess losing her mind at 2 a.m. woke me up, but this time there are terrible screams coming from the goat pen. I ran away, but it's too late. Whatever it was gone, as was one of the goats. The rest huddled in a corner of the shelter shivering. I could hear the goats' screams as they were carried up and over the mountain at incredible speed. I felt so defeated. That was war. It has to stop. This land is ancient, but now it is our land. It's our home. We will not be expelled. I looked online and found no help, just a bunch of people who fake scary things to get attention on social media. No real information. So I went to folklore. I shot some 405G bullets with silver, mixed into the lead and loaded them in Starline brass. I was going to put that new 45/70th with the tritium front night sight to good use. It was cold that night. I ate my favorite meal if it was my last. I had no idea what I was up against or if it would work. Would it appear again? I climbed onto my roof and made myself comfortable. The moon was about 3/4 full, so there was plenty of light to see from my elevated position. I started to doze off. I felt like I couldn't stay awake. I woke up scared. I have no idea how long I was unconscious, but it was silent, uncomfortably quiet. I noticed movement at the entrance as a large, low, black shadow slunk towards the goats. I fixed that bright green front sight on whatever my adversary actually was and squeezed the trigger. Click! Oh no! In my sleep state, I forgot about the stupid safety catch that doesn't let the dog fall completely. The black wolf stands up on its hind legs and lets out that horrible growl roar we've heard before, the most primal sound you've ever heard. It reverberates in your chest. It's so loud, but I could barely hear it over the rush of adrenaline and the racing heartbeat in my ears. I cocked the hammer again, removed the safety as he dropped to all fours, and squeezed the trigger. The heartbeat in my ears was replaced by the hum of the roar of the rifle, and I lost some of my night vision from the muzzle flash. The beast fell to the ground, struggled, and then shot back to the forest. I stayed up there watching until dawn. After the sun came up and it was light enough to see, I walked over to where the best was, and there was a patch of meat, nasty-looking gray that smelled bad. It was the most rotten, putrid smell you could imagine. I knew I had to be there. It was a 405 GR bullet that can easily stop a bear in mid-attack. When I reached the forest, I could see small patches of blood dry, but not too much and no creatures. I followed the trail where I might see turned leaves, a broken branch, or ground disturbance. Once I got to the top, I really hoped I had recruited some help. I continued to be cautious and watch, trying not to be led into a trap of my own. I followed the trail to the property line of the haunted inn. The land was for sale. It looked like no one had owned it for a long time, and I had work to do, so I continued. She took me down the mountain towards where the lodge used to be. Before reaching the lodge site, The trail took me past what appeared to be an old, unmarked grave, and back to the ridge, and through a steep, narrow ravine with large chunks of rock and boulders. At the very top was a small opening into a cave or possibly abandoned silver mine. The area stank so much that I could barely keep myself from vomiting. The large rock ledge had some sort of ancient symbol carved into it, but there was no time to get distracted. I looked into the hole as best I could see, and I swore there was an old spear there, like the ones the conquerors carried. There was no way I could go in and find out. Between the smell, the horror of what I'd seen, and how he'd come back here after being shot, I was done. I wanted to go home, so I went. It's been 3 years with no sightings or strangeness. I just make sure to leave a deer in that corner of the property every year. He's never there when I get back. My son started cooking bizarre recipes. My son is non-verbal autistic. I love him more than anything in the world, but it's hard, very difficult. When he turned 18, his mother and I had a huge argument. She wanted to send him to an asylum, and I refused. I couldn't bear the thought of him being abused, which I heard was common in places like that. We fought for months until one day we had our final fight. If you want to spend the rest of your life taking care of him, then you can do it yourself, she told me. I haven't seen her since. To this day, I know I made the right decision, but that doesn't make it any easier. You know, more than anything, I wish he could tell me what he wants. He would often have these meltdowns, screaming and crying, and I would do anything to give him what he wanted if I knew what it was. It was about 6 months ago that he became obsessed with cooking. He simply said, "Chef, chef, chef," repeatedly. Maybe he learned it from a show or YouTube or something, I'm not sure. Anyway, I decided it was time to teach him how to cook. We started with eggs, but he got so frustrated that he started covering his ears, screaming. Okay, not eggs. We tried making banana bread, smoothies, and even pasta. Every time his reaction was the same. I was running out of ideas until one day he handed me a note. It was a shopping list that confused me for several reasons. First, as far as I knew, my son couldn't write anything other than his name, let alone a complete shopping list in perfect cursive. Second, it was the most bizarre ingredient list I had ever seen. Anchovies, sauerkraut, horseradish. I had no idea what to do with it, but he was persistent, so I reluctantly agreed. I knew it was a giant waste of time, money, and food, but it seemed to make him happy. So why not? When we got home, he was ecstatic. He immediately ran to the kitchen and started mixing the ingredients. Both the appearance and the smell were repulsive, but he continued on, happy as a clam. When he was done, he covered the disgusting concoction with plastic wrap and put it in the fridge before going to play Xbox. As strange as this whole experience has been so far, I haven't seen him smile so much since his mother was around. I checked the fridge the next morning, ready to throw the mixture out. To my horror, it was empty. It had been licked and placed carefully in the sink. I shouted at him to come up and told him sternly that he couldn't eat the things he makes and that he would get sick. Sure enough, he had diarrhea for days after that. I tried to put the whole ordeal out of my mind before he came to me with another note a few days later. The ingredients were somehow worse than before. Meat raw, gummy bears, hot sauce, etc. I tried to refuse, but he persisted. I enjoyed his food, but I threw it away immediately afterward. Once he was done, he wrapped it up and tried to put it in the fridge. I took it from him. "Hey, that was fun, but we have to throw that away now. It's not good to eat," I told him. He had a complete breakdown, kicking, screaming, crying, biting. It literally lasted over an hour before I finally calmed him down in his room. After going back upstairs and finally getting rid of the putrid mess, I continued going over the situation in my mind. Most of all, I focused on the note. I hadn't thought to test it to make sure he was actually the one who wrote it. The next day I sat him down and tried to write some basic words, but he, as before, could only write his name in block letters. I dismissed it as my stomach boiled with rage. Someone had given him that note, tricked him into making these recipes and eating them. I was going to find out who and kick the shit them as hell. It was summer, so it wasn't someone from school. He never left the house without me, so it must have been someone in the neighborhood. Probably that piece of shit from Mitchell down the street. I went out and bought a dozen security cameras. For 3 sleepless nights, I stared at the tree line, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever bastard was giving my son these notes. On the 3rd night, I realized I was looking entirely in the wrong place. Slowly, so slowly at first that I thought I might be imagining it, the lid of my septic tank slid off. From it emerged a man, covered from head to toe in thick, viscous mud. It crept under my back porch, obscured by shadows. After a minute, he used a stick to push a note under my doormat. He crawled back into the septic tank, gently knocking on my son's window before quickly jumping back in and closing it. My son then got up, went to the back porch and picked up the note before returning to his room and placing it under his pillow. Disgusted, shocked, repulsive. I don't know the words to fully describe how I felt at that moment. I don't know if the words exist in the English language. When I regained my composure, I ran to his room, ripped off the pillow, and found the note. Looking at the window, I saw the brown streaks where the man had hit. I ran, grabbed my shotgun, and went through the front door to sneak around the back. It was a hot summer night, and I felt sweat start to run down my skin almost immediately. For a moment, I wondered what the state law was for shooting someone hiding in their septic tank. In the next moment, I decided that I didn't give a damn and that this sick man should kill him. I crawled over to the tank, my barrel focused on him the entire time. After turning on my flashlight, I kicked the lid off, illuminating the layer of thick foam. For a few moments, nothing happened, until I saw some bubbles rise to the surface. My finger was squeezing the trigger as the water exploded upward, showing me the unholy mess. Before I knew it, the man had pushed me to the ground and was running toward the tree line. As soon as I regained my balance, I fired all the shots I had, so I reloaded and did it again. Officers arrived soon, as they had received more than a dozen calls of rapid shotgun fire in the middle of the night. I explained everything to them as they looked at me with disbelief and disgust. A few more cars arrived with dogs, but they never found him. I'm not a rich man, but I spent every last dollar I had connecting that house to the city sewer and paying a company to come with an excavator to rip out that entire damn septic system in my backyard. It still makes me sick thinking about my son cooking concoctions for that bastard to feast on his excrement. I tried my best to forget, to try to erase it from my memory. That was until I found a package on my door containing $10,000 and a note saying, "For my little chef."